I'm Aliza Inbal. I understand what I wasn't in the room because I was receiving Professor Braverman. I was already introduced or talked about. So I'm the head of the Paris Innovation for International Development program, which is sponsoring this conference. Before I was here, I used to work in the World Bank, and listening to Professor Braverman speak, I was reminded of something I was told when I first joined the World Bank. And what I was told was, every morning when you walk into the World Bank, you have to ask yourself the question of which World Bank you're walking into. And the idea is that what I was explained is there's actually two World Banks. There's the World Bank of the economists and the World Bank of the social sciences, the scientists. And it's actually two totally different World Banks in terms of how they see the world, in terms of what their priorities are. And so listening to Professor Braverman, one thing about Professor Braverman is, is that he leaves his phone. I hope it wasn't on, but is that he's both the chair of the Economic Council here in Israel and has this hugely rich development background. And so I think that you had a chance to hear from both Professor Bravermans this morning. What I thought was what he did talk about, though, which I think is very interesting and is really the theme of the conference, is this idea of shared value, and this idea that for years and years and years and decades and decades and decades, we've been working on trying to support development processes, and supporting development processes in a way where I think both people who worked in development from the north and people who were coming from the south had this perception of it as a almost zero-sum game, as in there's it's a flow of resources in one direction. And so, and in terms of different perspectives on development, some would have said, well, it's a flow of resources from the developing world to the developed world. This idea that the developed world is exploiting the developing world, and then others would have talked about it or seen it as a flow of resources of the North giving the South all of the knowledge we have and all of the expertise we have in helping them become like us. And I think that what's happened over the past few years, and this is very much what this conference is about, is that people are more and more stopping to look at development as a matter of one taking from the other or one giving the other. And there's much more of an evolution of a perspective which says that development is about working together for shared value. And within that context of working together for shared value, the private sector is enormously important. Because one of the things that we've learned along the way is that the private sector can be very damaging and can do things which are exploitative and which are extractive in developing countries, but they also have an enormous power to do good. And the secret, I think, in a lot of ways to actually having sustainable processes of development is trying to find the way to leverage the private sector to do good. And that's what we're talking about today, particularly in the field of agricultural innovation, which is, of course, a field which is of great importance here in Israel. So the way that this conference is going to work is we have three panels. And in each panel, we have a case study first of an example that we found of a really positive example of leveraging the private sector in different ways. And then after that, we're going to have a panel which, with various discussants who will not only discuss the case study, or primarily will talk a little bit more about themselves and broaden the discussion of what these things mean. And so our first panel is a panel on public-private partnership, and specifically on models for taking private sector companies from developing countries, having them partner with aid organizations or with governments in order to try to make a difference and try to work and with smallholder farmers and make a difference in terms of their capacity to use technology to increase yields and to reach their goals. And so what I'd like to do right now is I'd like to invite to the stage our first, Deborah is here. Where is Deborah? Deborah. She just walked out. I've never had that happen to me before in a conference. Does anyone know any good jokes? I remember once going to actually a concert of Macy Gray, who was a pop singer, and the And now I'm getting phone calls. This is very strange. And halfway through the concert, sorry? Well, we'll find her. That's why we have people, right? So I went to this concert, and the lead singer at some point in time didn't feel well, so she walked off the stage and left all the band members there. Hello, Deborah. Deborah Hamilton is working on a USAID sponsored project called Feed the Future Partnerships for Innovation, which is all about exactly this theme of trying to find ways to bring the private sector more and more into agricultural development. And I will say no more because I will leave it to you to explain exactly what it is that you do.